I couldn't tell if it was blood or mud dripping down the side of my face. My lungs burned. Every step I took sank deeper into the sludge, like the ground itself was trying to swallow me whole. The air was thick, heavy, and reeked of something metallic, something burnt and rotten. Behind me, branches snapped, but there were no footsteps, just movement, the kind that didn't make sense, the kind that felt like the wind was alive and chasing me. Whispers curled through the trees, twisting my name in ways no human voice should. It knew me. It had been watching. I collapsed to my knees near a clearing, gasping, shaking, praying this was just a nightmare. But it wasn't. This all started because of one damned email. 4 weeks earlier, I was just another English professor in Boston. 34 years old, divorced, burned out. I spent my days lecturing on phonetics to half-interested community college students and my nights drowning in cheap whiskey and obscure linguistics documentaries. My apartment smelled like old coffee and wet books. The ceiling leaked when it rained. I'd been living like a ghost, drifting from one semester to the next, trying to forget that the life I planned, marriage, tenure, kids, had quietly crumbled while I wasn't looking. That Tuesday, the sky outside was gray and swollen. I remember because it matched the way I felt inside. Then the email arrived. Subject: urgent, academic cultural exchange opportunity. From Dr. Vlad Ionescu. At first I thought it was spam, but I recognized the name. Ionescu was a Romanian ethnolinguist whose work I'd cited in grad school. He specialized in endangered dialects, especially those from Eastern Europe. The message was brief but formal. He was coordinating a government-sponsored cultural project in a remote village in the Carpathian Mountains where a unique, undocumented dialect was still spoken. They were seeking a native English speaker with linguistic expertise to assist with phonetic transcription and translation comparisons. All expenses paid: travel, lodging, meals, a 3-week stay, access to field notes, and possible co-authorship on the final publication. It felt surreal. Opportunities like this didn't land in my inbox. Not randomly, not like this. But I didn't hesitate. Not really. I think part of me was looking for a reason to disappear, to go somewhere no one knew my name, where I could be someone else for a while. I replied the same night. 3 days later, I was on a plane to Romania. The first leg was normal enough, Boston to Frankfurt, then to Bucharest. But from there, things got different. A man with a sign met me at the airport. He didn't speak much English, but he smiled politely and handed me an envelope sealed in wax. Inside was a handwritten note. "Welcome, Professor Fields. Your journey begins soon. Please do not stray from the guide. The path is known to shift at night." I assumed it was a poetic tradition, maybe something local. Quaint. I didn't think much of it. We drove for hours, past towns, then villages, then winding forest roads so narrow the branches scraped the car. The further we went, the quieter it got. Cell signal dropped. Then the GPS glitched out completely. By the time we arrived, the sun was slipping behind jagged hills, casting long, bleeding shadows across the dirt paths. The village didn't have a name I could pronounce. It wasn't on any map I'd seen. A single unpaved road split the tiny settlement. Stone houses with thatched roofs leaned slightly inward like they were whispering secrets to each other. Children stared at me from behind fences. Their eyes didn't sparkle with curiosity. They looked wary, like they'd seen strangers before, and it never ended well. My host, a man named Petru, greeted me with a firm handshake. He wore an old wool coat despite the summer heat and spoke with a slow, deliberate cadence. His English was decent, though heavily accented. "You're welcome here," he said, "but there are rules." I laughed, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. Do not go into the woods at night. Do not enter the house on the hill. And above all, he said, never speak her name, not even in your thoughts. I waited for a smile, a wink, something. But his face was stone. That night he showed me to a small cottage with creaky floors and walls that smelled faintly of herbs and smoke. There was no electricity, just oil lamps. A basin of water sat in the corner beside a wooden bed frame covered in animal skins. I unpacked in silence, the sound of crickets filling the gaps between my thoughts. Every once in a while, I thought I heard something move outside, soft, shuffling, almost rhythmic. But when I looked through the cracked window, there was nothing there. I didn't sleep much. Over the next few days, I began my work. The villagers were hesitant, but not hostile. They spoke an odd dialect of Romanian, closer to Latin in some structures, older, more poetic. Some phrases didn't even have equivalents in modern language. It was like listening to time speak. One old woman, Maria, became my unofficial liaison. She was sharp-eyed, quick-tongued, and laughed whenever I mispronounced something. She said, "English tongue too soft. Ours must bite to survive." There was beauty in their speech, but also something off. Certain words they refused to say out loud. Instead, they would draw symbols in the dirt or touch amulets around their necks. A few phrases made the air feel heavier, like it didn't want to carry their sound. I documented everything, recorded interviews, filled notebooks, but the more I listened, the more I felt something coiling beneath their language, something old, something waiting. And always there was that house on the hill. It stood alone at the edge of the forest, wrapped in vines and shadow. No one approached it. The path leading there was overgrown, but not completely blocked, as if people still used it, carefully, secretly. I asked Petru once why it was abandoned. He didn't answer, just handed me a glass of plum brandy and changed the subject. Later that night I woke to a sound of chanting, low, rhythmic, in a tongue I didn't recognize. I stepped outside and saw nothing, but the chanting stopped as soon as I opened the door, like it had been meant for me and only me. From the woods, something watched. I felt it, not saw it, but deep in my bones I knew. And yet I stayed. Curiosity is a hell of a drug. So is pride. I told myself I was here for research, for the work, but part of me wanted to know what they were hiding, what they feared. I never should have gone into the forest. I never should have looked toward the hill. And above all, I never should have tried to speak her name.
The village didn't exist on any map I could find. I tried, believe me. I brought paper maps, downloaded offline versions, even asked Petru for coordinates. Every attempt to locate it ended in circles. GPS refused to work past the last paved road, and the villagers just laughed when I asked for a name. "This is just the village," they said, as if there were no need for anything else. The isolation was suffocating at first. No phone signal, no internet. The radio in my backpack picked up nothing but static. But over time, the silence became something else, almost alive, like the air had grown used to stillness and didn't want it disturbed. Each morning, I walked the main path, greeted the elders, and tried to build rapport with the locals. Most were farmers or woodworkers, simple lives, deeply rooted in tradition. But they all shared a strange kind of alertness, like prey that never stops listening for predators. Maria, the old woman who had become my guide of sorts, warned me not to ask too many questions. "Too many ears," she said, tapping her temple, then the earth beneath us. "Some listen from below." I didn't understand, not then. My days were spent cataloging words and phrases, recording conversations, and translating what little I could with Maria's help. Their dialect was more than just old. It was structured around avoidance. There were entire areas of vocabulary they wouldn't touch. Words for things that crawled, slithered, or hid in the dark were deliberately misspoken or replaced with gestures. The word for forest was never spoken aloud after dusk. They used a phrase that roughly translated to the place where eyes do not close. The word for dream was only said during the day and never indoors. The word for sister had two different versions, one for the living, one for the dead. At first, I thought it was folklore, a quirky survival of archaic beliefs. But the way they said these things, it wasn't theatrical. It wasn't like stories passed down for fun. It was real to them, urgent, ritualistic. Then there were the symbols, painted above doors, carved into wood, sewn into clothes. Each symbol seemed to serve a different purpose: protection, warding, remembrance. I asked Petru once about the one above my cottage door, a small spiral enclosed in a circle of jagged lines. "It keeps her away," he said flatly. "Her who?" He just shook his head. "She knows her name, that's enough." One morning, I noticed a group of villagers gathered near the edge of the forest. They stood in a loose circle around a goat, which had been painted with red dye in strange patterns. The animal was silent, unnaturally so. I'd never seen a goat not make noise, not even once. Maria found me watching. "You should not look," she whispered, then pulled me away. Later that evening, I asked her what I'd seen. "A binding," she said, "to keep the threshold closed." I asked what threshold she meant. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she poured us both a cup of something bitter and dark and stared into the flames of her fireplace. "There is a tear in this land, a place where what is buried tries to rise." I waited, but she said nothing more. The villagers rarely ventured beyond the tree line. Even during the day, they stuck to paths that looped close to the houses. The children were not allowed to play near the woods. One night, I heard a child crying in the dark, and the next morning, the entire village was in mourning. No one told me what happened, but there was an empty chair at breakfast, and Petru's hands were shaking when he lit the morning fire. I was beginning to feel the weight of something I couldn't name. The village wasn't just remote, it was sealed, like the world had turned its back on it, and the people had learned to survive without ever looking up for help. And yet, something always watched from the trees. I tried to rationalize it: stress, isolation. My academic mind refused to believe in monsters, but the evidence kept building. One night, while listening to my recordings, I caught something strange. Between the words, between syllables, there were faint clicks, rhythmic, too deliberate to be static. I played it over and over again, slowed it down, isolated frequencies. The pattern resembled speech, not human, but structured, like something was responding in the spaces I hadn't noticed before. I showed it to Petru. He listened once, then closed the recorder and handed it back to me without a word. Later, I found the device buried in the ash pit behind my cottage, cracked, burned, destroyed. That same night, the spiral symbol above my door was painted over with thick black oil. I began to notice changes in myself, too. Dreams that weren't mine. Memories of places I'd never been. Faces with no eyes staring at me behind trees. I started waking up with dirt under my fingernails, even though I hadn't left the cottage. Once I found blood on my socks. I didn't have any cuts. And always the presence on the hill. That damn house. Always in the corner of my vision, as if it was slowly getting closer. The vines on its walls looked like veins, pulsing. The windows weren't dark. They were watching. I stopped looking at it, but I could still feel it. Maria begged me to leave. "You are not from here," she said. "She knows that. Outsiders call to her without meaning to." I told her I still had work to finish. "You are not here for work. You're here because something opened when you broke." "What do you mean?" "You came already hollow. That's why she noticed you." That night, I heard knocking on my door. But when I opened it, nothing. Only footprints in the dirt. Bare, small, like a child's. Leading away from the door and into the forest. 2 days later, I followed them. I know I shouldn't have, but I had to see where they led. Maybe it was madness. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe part of me had already given up. The tracks led me past the tree line and into the woods, deeper than I'd ever gone. The trees grew closer, gnarled, like they were leaning in to listen. Then I saw it. A circle of storms, ancient, moss-covered, carved with the same spiral as my cottage door. In the center, a doll, handmade, twisted from bone and twine. Its mouth was sewn shut, but its eyes were open and very human, too human. When I bent to examine it, I heard a whisper right behind me. Not near me, inside me. It said a name, and I felt something shift under the soil. Something had heard. I ran back to the village. I tried to pretend nothing had happened, but the air felt different. The villagers stopped speaking when I passed. Maria refused to see me. And that night, the knocking returned. Only this time, it didn't stop.
The knocking stopped just before sunrise. I sat in bed, back against the wall, a rusted kitchen knife clutched in my hand like it could actually protect me. Every hour, I swore I heard movement on the roof. Scraping, dragging, breathing that didn't belong to anything human. But when the morning light broke over the mountains, the world outside looked normal again. Too normal. That was always the worst part. The way the village reset each day like nothing had happened. Like it wanted me to question my own sanity. I tried to confront Maria, but her door was barred shut. A small circle of ash had been spread across her doorstep, with a dead crow placed carefully at the center. A warning. Or a ward. Either way, I got the message. I wandered the village that day in a fog. No one met my eyes. Even the children had disappeared. It felt like the entire place was holding its breath. Then, Petru approached me. He said there would be a gathering that evening. A tradition. I was invited, though the tone of his voice told me it wasn't optional. I asked him what it was. He didn't answer. Just said I should wear dark clothes and not speak during the ritual. "Whatever you hear," he said, "do not speak, not even to yourself." The clearing was deep in the woods, yet the villagers moved through the forest with eerie ease, lanterns flickering like floating stars between the trees. They brought offerings, bread, herbs, bones wrapped in cloth. I followed in silence, the soft crunch of leaves beneath my boots the only sound I dared make. The clearing was circular, framed by large standing stones, each one carved with sigils I had begun to recognize, old protection glyphs, warnings, and something else, symbols I hadn't seen before, twisting serpentine patterns that seemed to move when I didn't look directly at them. At the center was a stone basin, empty, cracked with age. The villagers formed a circle around it. Maria appeared from the shadows, walking slowly, holding a small wooden bowl filled with thick, dark liquid. She looked at me once, her eyes filled with something between sorrow and fear, then looked away. The ritual began with a low hum. It wasn't music. It wasn't even chanting in any structured language I could identify. It was older than that. A vocal vibration that passed through skin and bone. It made my stomach twist and the hairs on my arms rise. Each villager, one by one, stepped forward, dipped a finger into the bowl and marked their forehead. Then they whispered something into the basin. I couldn't hear what they said, but every time someone spoke, the air grew colder. When it was Maria's turn, she didn't speak. She only wept. Then they turned to me, all eyes, every pair in the circle watching. Petru stepped beside me and offered the bowl. "You are part of this now," he said. I hesitated. The liquid smelt like rust and burnt wood. My fingers trembled as I dipped them in and pressed the mark to my head. Then I leaned toward the basin. I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know if I believed in any of it. But something rose in my throat before I could stop it. A word. Not English, not Romanian. Something else. A name. It slipped out before I could swallow it back, and the forest went silent. The villagers recoiled. The humming stopped. Maria dropped the bowl. Petru stared at me, eyes wide with disbelief. "What did you say?" he whispered. I don't know," I stammered. It just came out." And then the ground trembled. Not like an earthquake. This was deeper. A vibration beneath the bones of the world. Birds burst from the trees in a frantic blur. The air thickened, pressing down like a hand on my chest. From somewhere beyond the stones, a sound rose. A wail. Long. Hollow. Wrong. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't human. It was answering. The villagers scattered without a word. Some ran. Others dropped to their knees, muttering prayers I couldn't understand. Petru grabbed me by the arm and dragged me through the woods faster than I thought a man his age could move. When we reached my cottage, he slammed the door and bolted it. "You said her name," he hissed. "I didn't know it was her name." "You thought it. That's enough." He pulled the curtain shut, stuffed dried herbs into the window cracks, and began carving something into the doorframe with a hunting knife. "What is she? What have I done?" I asked. Petru stopped carving and looked at me with haunted eyes. "She's not a ghost, not a spirit. She was here before words, before light. Our ancestors called her the Nameless Mother. She is the womb of silence. And now, you've woken her." That night, I dreamed of the house on the hill. Only this time, I was inside. The walls pulsed like organs, bleeding from their seams. The floors were alive, covered in something soft and warm and breathing. And in the center of the room, a cradle, covered in vines, rocking gently. I stepped closer, heart pounding. Inside was something wrapped in cloth, small, silent. And when I reached to touch it, the bundle opened its eyes. They were mine. I woke up screaming, and outside the knocking had returned. Only this time, it wasn't at the door. It was coming from beneath the floorboards.
The knocking didn't stop. It came in slow, deliberate bursts, like knuckles against hollow bone. 3 knocks, then silence, then 3 more, always from underneath. I stood frozen in the center of the room, the knife from the kitchen back in my hand, my breath sharp and ragged. The floor creaked beneath my feet, not from movement, but from pressure, like something was pushing up from below. I wanted to run, but run where? Outside, the village was asleep, or pretending to be. No lights, no voices, just that damn knocking, timed perfectly with the thudding in my chest. Eventually, I did the only thing I could think of. I shoved a heavy trunk over the spot and collapsed on the bed, eyes locked on the floor until exhaustion won out. I woke up to silence and sunlight, both of which felt wrong. My body was drenched in sweat. The air in the room was thick and sour, like something had died during the night. When I moved the trunk, I found nothing. No marks, no cracks, no trace that anything had been there. I might have convinced myself it was just a dream if it weren't for what was under my bed. A doll. The same one I'd seen in the forest. Twine, bone, human eyes. Only now, its sewn mouth was open. I threw it into the fireplace and didn't look back. Petru refused to speak to me that day. His door stayed shut, no fire lit, no food prepared. Maria didn't answer when I knocked. It was like I'd been excommunicated from a religion I didn't know I had joined. I walked the village aimlessly, expecting someone, anyone, to yell at me, to explain, to punish me. But there was only distance, avoidance. Except from the children. They watched me now, not with fear, but interest, curiosity. One of them even smiled. It was a strange, crooked thing, not malicious, just wrong. Like they were seeing me from the other side of something I couldn't cross. That evening, I sat outside my cottage, watching the sun bleed behind the hills. I hadn't noticed before how the forest seemed to pull the light into itself, as if the trees swallowed it rather than letting it fade. And just before the last ray vanished, I saw something move at the edge of the woods. A woman. Too far to see clearly, but I knew she was watching, not standing still, swaying, almost like rocking. I blinked, and she was gone. That night, I locked every door and window, lit every oil lamp I could find, scattered salt in the corners like Maria had once done. I even slept with the knife tucked under my pillow. It didn't matter. I woke up to chanting. It wasn't outside. It was inside my room. But no one was there. The air shimmered like heat rising from asphalt. Shadows twisted along the ceiling in shapes I didn't recognize. I heard whispers, not words, but suggestions, echoes of meaning. And in the center of it all, a name I couldn't remember, even as I heard it. Then, something touched my foot. I sat up, heart in my throat, and pulled the blanket back. Nothing. But when I turned on the lamp, I saw it. Tiny footprints, muddy and bare, walking from the foot of my bed to the door. And the door was open. I ran outside. The village was dark, silent, but the forest glowed. A pale green light pulsed between the trees, low to the ground, like will-o-wisps dancing. I should have stayed inside. I know that now. But something was pulling me, not just curiosity anymore, something deeper, a tether, a call. I walked barefoot into the woods. The ground was soft and warm beneath my feet, like moss-covered skin. The trees bent inward, forming a canopy that blocked the stars. The air smelled sweet, too sweet, like rotting fruit. And the light led me forward. After what felt like hours, I reached a clearing I hadn't seen before. And there it was, the house on the hill. Except now, it wasn't on a hill. It was right in front of me, closer, realer. The walls pulsed gently in the moonlight, the vines twitching like veins beneath skin. The door was cracked open, waiting. I stepped inside. The temperature dropped instantly. My breath came in clouds. The walls were lined with mirrors, but each one reflected something different. Not me, not the room. Things that shouldn't exist, scenes I couldn't name. One showed Maria, standing over a crib, crying. Another showed Petru, much younger, carving symbols into a child's forehead. A third showed me, standing exactly where I was, only older, paler, with eyes completely black. I backed away, heart hammering. Then I heard it. A lullaby, soft, melodic, coming from upstairs. Despite everything in me screaming to leave, I climbed the stairs. Each step groaned like it hadn't been touched in centuries. At the top was a single room. Inside, a cradle, rocking. I stepped forward, holding my breath, and then I saw her. Not in the cradle, in the mirror behind it. Tall, pale, hair like flowing ink, a face that was almost human, except for the eyes, endless and hollow and wrong. Her arms cradled something I couldn't see, but I could feel it watching me. She didn't move, but her reflection did. It smiled and whispered, "You called me." I ran, tripped, fell down the stairs, didn't stop, crashed through the door, through the trees, back to the cottage. I didn't sleep. I didn't speak. But the next morning, every mirror in the village was covered, and the spiral above my door had turned black.
I didn't open the door for 3 days. Didn't eat, didn't wash, just sat on the floor with my back against the wall, knife in hand, eyes fixed on the fireplace. The silence was louder than any noise I'd ever known. It pressed against my skull like static, humming, growing, breathing. Sometimes I'd catch movement from the corners of my eyes, a twitch in the shadows, a flicker behind the curtains. But every time I turned, nothing. Only that scent, sweet rot, a mix of jasmine and meat. On the third morning, I found something waiting at the foot of my bed. Not the doll. A bundle of long black hair, still damp, tied with red thread. I threw up in the sink. Someone knocked at the door that afternoon, but it wasn't the same as before. It was frantic, desperate. I opened it, and there stood Maria, soaked, shivering, clutching something wrapped in cloth. Before I could speak, she pushed past me and slammed the door shut. "You saw her," she said. Her voice was flat, but her eyes were wild. I didn't answer. She walked to the table, unwrapped the bundle, and laid it out. A book, no title, bound in stitched leather, stained and cracked with age. It looked handmade, almost alive. I didn't want to touch it. "You need to understand what she is," Maria whispered, "before she takes more of you." She flipped the book open and turned it to me.
The pages were filled with illustrations, rituals, symbols, anatomy sketches of things that weren't quite human. One showed a tall, pale woman holding a bundle in her arms, standing in front of a house swallowed by trees. Underneath, a single word, Alkina. She was never buried, only bound. Bound? Centuries ago, she lost her child. No one knows how. She screamed through the village for days, carrying the body, cursing God, cursing the land. She became something else. She pointed to a drawing of a spiral, almost identical to the one carved above my door. They trapped her in the forest, the villagers. They built the hill around her, marked the trees, covered the mirrors. They thought it would keep her away. My throat went dry, but it didn't. No, she said, because someone always breaks the rules. Me. Maria looked at me like she was already grieving. She latched on to grief, to emptiness, to foreign blood. I thought about the mirrors, the doll, the whisper in the clearing. You called me. I didn't call anyone. But you did, she said, just not with words. That night, I read the book. It wasn't written in any language I knew, but I understood it anyway, not with my eyes, with something deeper, like the pages were speaking to a part of me I'd forgotten. One entry stood out. It was about mirrors. It claimed that Alkina's spirit didn't exist in one place. She reflected, that she wasn't seen, but shown. That once you witnessed her, part of you belonged to her, and part of her lived inside you. By the end of the chapter, my reflection no longer blinked when I did. Petru finally knocked on my door the next day. He looked older, weaker, as if something had been feeding on him. She marked you. I warned you. I didn't know what I was walking into. He looked at the blackened spiral above my door and shook his head. No one ever does. He stepped inside without asking and placed a small bowl on the floor. It was filled with black salt, crushed bone, and oil. He lit it. The flame burned blue. Don't leave this house tonight, no matter what you hear, no matter who knocks. I nodded. He turned to go, then hesitated. There's a place north of the woods, past the stream, the shrine. If you want to break the link, that's where you start. I waited until he was gone before I whispered to myself, what if I don't want to break it? That night the flame turned green, and I heard her voice again, not in whispers, clear, warm. I should have been afraid. I was afraid. But there was something else too. Relief. That night I dreamed of her. We stood in a field of dead sunflowers, the sky black, the moon red. She stood beside me, her hand in mine, her skin cold, her smile serene. Her voice echoed like song. Will you carry what I lost? I cried, and smiling. The days blurred. I stopped eating, but I didn't feel hunger. I stopped sleeping, but I didn't feel tired. Instead, I listened to the whispers behind the walls, to the footsteps above my ceiling, to the wind that carried her name. Maria came once more, pounding on my door, screaming my name, begging me to come outside. I didn't answer, because I wasn't sure I was me anymore. My reflection had begun to change. It smiled when I didn't. Its lips moved seconds before mine. Its eyes watched me. It was her, watching through me, learning how to wear me, and I let her. On the 7th night, I went back to the forest. The air was warm. The path opened for me like an old friend. I reached the clearing, but the house was gone. Instead, there was a pit, wide, black, breathing. I stood at the edge and looked down, and there she was, not the figure from the mirrors, the real her. No longer human, no longer a woman, a mass of flowing black hair, faces stitched into her skin, arms too long, fingers too sharp, eyes, dozens of them, each one blinking at a different rhythm. She didn't speak, but I heard her anyway. You brought me a vessel. My skin burned, my teeth ached, blood ran from my ears, and I said the words I didn't know I knew. Yes.
I don't know how I got home from the pit. I remember standing at the edge, staring into her eyes. No, our eyes. And then waking up on the floor of the cabin. The salt bowl was shattered, the flame long dead. My face was damp with blood and tears. Something had changed, not just around me, in me. I moved differently, slower, as if I was underwater. My thoughts weren't mine alone. I would hear myself thinking things I didn't believe. I would look at my own hands and feel nothing. I would say things in languages I never learned. The mirror in the hallway had cracked on its own, a jagged line running down the middle, two halves of a face that no longer matched. I was unraveling, but a part of me didn't care. It was like she had crawled inside my chest, curled up in the hollow space I thought I'd buried, and whispered, "Now you'll never be alone again." Maria came back 2 nights later. She didn't knock. She kicked the door open, stormed in, and threw something at me. It was the doll, soaked in blood. "Your time is running out," she said. I didn't move. I couldn't. Maria stood over me, her face furious and broken. "I warned you. I brought you the book. I trusted you, and you let her in." "I didn't mean to." "You let her in. You wanted it. That thing feeds on grief, and you gave her a banquet." She was crying now. "You think you're special? That she chose you for a reason?" She leaned in close, her breath hot and furious against my cheek. "She chooses everyone, anyone broken enough to hear her. You're just next in line." She left without another word, but she left the doll behind. I picked it up. Its button eyes were gone. In their place, a mirror shard and a human tooth. That night, the dreams changed. They weren't dreams anymore. They were memories, but they weren't mine. I saw a woman screaming in the woods, holding a bundle of red cloth, blood on her hands, villagers chasing her, pitchforks, fire, her wails shattering the sky. I was her. I felt every step, every scream, every burn. I felt my child turn cold in my arms. I felt the moment I gave up being human. When I woke, my hands were raw and blistered. I'd been digging, in my sleep, outside, behind the cabin, and there was something buried there now, a small, shallow grave. No name, just stones. I didn't remember placing them, but I knew what was inside. Petru came to the house at dusk. He didn't enter. He stood on the edge of the porch, clutching a wooden charm in his fist, trembling. "I saw what you buried," he said. "She made you dig it up." I nodded. "She's almost finished," he whispered. "When the reflection no longer matches, she walks." I looked at the cracked mirror. My reflection no longer blinked. It smiled when I didn't, and now it was mouthing something. Not words, a name. Alcina. Petru flinched. The charm in his hand cracked. I tried to stop this years ago. When I was a boy, she came for my sister. I thought we stopped her then. I thought we sealed her. But someone always finds the house, always opens the mirror. He took one step closer, his voice softer now. But we can end it at the shrine. You still have a choice. I shook my head. Not anymore. He looked at me for a long time, then dropped the charm on the porch and left. It burned where it landed. That night, I sat in front of the mirror and watched myself for hours. The other me was clearer now, not just a reflection, a version. Its eyes were darker, hair longer, skin paler. She was becoming me, or I was becoming her. At midnight, she moved on her own, raised her hand, pointed at me, and smiled. And then she stepped forward, shattering the glass, and I felt something break inside my chest. I gasped, and blood poured from my mouth. Not just blood, hair, long, black, silky. I screamed until my throat tore, and the house answered with laughter. I fled. I don't remember grabbing my coat or leaving the door open or running barefoot through the snow, but I remember the trees moving for me, the branches parting, the wind whispering, "Come home." I reached the stream, crossed it, found the path beyond. The shrine stood crooked against the hillside, its roof half rotted, stone steps buried in leaves. But it was still there. Inside, candles burned on their own. Petru was waiting. He didn't look surprised. "I knew you'd come," he said. I collapsed onto the floor, shivering, coughing blood. "She's inside me," I said. "I know." He knelt beside me, drew a circle of ash and salt, placed a stone bowl in front of me. "You can still cast her out, but you will have to give her what she wants." "What does she want?" He looked at me, sorrow in his eyes. "A name." I didn't understand, until I did. Names hold power. They are memory, identity, shape. Alcina had lost hers when she became something else. Now she collects them, becomes them, but she can't fully cross over until someone gives her a new one, a willing one, a true one. I stared at the bowl, at the blade beside it. Blood and name, body and soul. A trade. Petru handed me the knife. I hesitated. For the first time in weeks, I felt fear, real fear. Not of her, but of losing myself. I looked into the bowl, saw my face reflected in the water, but not the one I remembered, pale, hollow, familiar. I whispered my name and sliced open my palm. The blood hit the water. The shrine shook. The candles blew out. And everything went silent.
The silence after the blood hit the bowl was louder than any scream. The air turned heavy. The shadows on the walls trembled like they were alive. Even the flames that had been snuffed out began to glow again, not as fire, but as eyes, watching, waiting. Petru stood frozen, chanting words under his breath. I couldn't understand them, but the sound grated against my bones. My blood bubbled in the bowl like it was boiling from within, and the reflection twisted into 1,000 broken versions of my face. Some smiled, One cried. And then I heard her. Inside me. A whisper, but everywhere. You gave me your name. Now I give you mine. My spine locked. My mouth moved on its own, and from deep in my chest I spoke a word I had never known. Alcina! The shrine exploded with wind and fire. The walls cracked, the floor bled, and from the mirror fragments on the floor, she rose. She was no longer just a shadow behind glass. She was me, or what I would become. Hair like rotting silk, skin stitched from grief, eyes full of centuries, and she smiled. Not cruelly, not hungrily, lovingly. Like a mother finally reunited with a child. She touched my face. I didn't flinch. Her fingers were cold, but familiar. You were always meant to carry me. I felt my skin ripple under her touch, my hands twitch, my mouth open, but no sound came out. Petru threw the charm at her, the wooden one he'd left at my cabin. It burst into flame mid-air and disintegrated before it touched her. He screamed a name, one I didn't recognize, and the shrine trembled. "You don't belong here, witch! I banish you!" Alcina turned toward him slowly, tilted her head, and smiled again. "You never learned, boy. Grief cannot be banished. It only waits." Then she raised her hand, and Petru's body folded in half like paper. His scream didn't last long. Blood poured from his mouth, ears, and eyes. He collapsed into the ash circle and burst into flames.
Petru was gone. All that remained was a smoldering outline of his body inside the ash ring. I couldn't move, couldn't cry, couldn't even breathe. Alcina stepped over the burned remains like they meant nothing. She looked at me with that impossible tenderness, like I was hers, like I had always been hers. "You carry the wound of knowing," she said softly, "but knowledge is only pain without purpose." She placed her hand on my chest, over my heart, and suddenly I was back in Boston. I was sitting in my old apartment, cold coffee next to me, email open, unread. Everything was still, normal. But something was wrong. I tried to move, but I couldn't feel my limbs. I couldn't hear the sounds of the city. No traffic, no footsteps, no life. The silence pressed in like a tomb. Then I saw it, the reflection in my computer screen. It wasn't me. It was her, Alcina. She blinked, and I blinked with her. "You can stay," she whispered from inside me. "Forget everything. No more pain, no more guilt, just peace." It was so tempting to let it all go, to forget the blood, the screams, the shrine, the monster I had become. Or, her voice darkened, or you carry the truth. You walk the world and remember me. Speak of me. Let them fear again. Let them remember what they buried. I was standing in the shrine again. The fire still burned, but now it was contained, surrounding us like a circle of judgment. I felt something in my hands. The journal. Dr. Ionescu's journal. The one with the map, the drawings, the warnings. I looked at Alcina one last time, and I understood. She didn't want to be banished. She wanted to be known. "So they remember," I whispered. She nodded and vanished. The fire dimmed, the shadows retreated, and I walked out of the shrine alone, but not empty. Never empty again.
I never went back to the cabin. Didn't pack a bag, didn't tell the school. I left everything, clothes, passport, phone, and walked for hours until I reached a village with a bus stop. My boots were soaked in mud and blood, but no one asked questions. Not in this country. Not when your eyes looked like mine did. When I finally boarded the flight back to the U.S., I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the shrine. I saw her, Alcina. I felt her still inside me, not haunting, not tormenting, but watching, waiting. The customs officer in Boston waved me through without a glance. Just another American coming home. But I wasn't that man anymore. I wasn't even sure I was a man anymore. Not completely. I checked into a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city. Blank walls, thin sheets, a TV with only static. It was perfect. I opened the journal Dr. Ionescu left me. I hadn't realized until now that it wasn't just about rituals and monsters. It was a warning and a blueprint, a record of what had once been known and was now forgotten. And I knew what I had to do. I started writing. Every night, for hours. Not just about Alcina, but about all of it. The mirrors, the voices, the shadows that moved behind the walls, Petru's last words, the look in Lydia's eyes before she died. People needed to know. Not because they would believe me. They wouldn't. But because they might feel it. That cold shiver, that unease, that primal dread that says, don't look into the mirror after midnight. Don't say her name. Don't enter the house where no birds sing. We used to know these rules. Now we call them folklore. But folklore is just memory with the edges sanded off. I posted the first part of the story on an old paranormal forum, hidden behind a username no one could trace. The response was lukewarm. Some called it creative fiction, others dismissed it entirely. But then messages started coming in. My grandmother used to tell us about the lady in the mirror, said she waits in the silver. This drawing you posted, it's identical to one I saw in a ruined chapel in the Carpathians. Never knew what it meant. I had a dream once about a woman with stitched eyes. She said I'd remember her when I bled. I wasn't alone. Alcina wasn't gone. She was waking up, through memory, through story, through me. A month later, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a small, cracked mirror and a note. For your altar, may she find you again. I threw it in the dumpster behind the motel. An hour later, it was on my desk. Same crack, same reflection, but this time, my reflection smiled. I smashed the mirror against the wall. Glass scattered, blood ran from my hand, and I heard her voice, soft and amused. You always come back to me. I tried to leave that night, drive west, maybe disappear in Montana or Alaska, somewhere cold and silent. But my car wouldn't start. My motel room wouldn't unlock from the inside. The clerk said I'd never checked in. My face wasn't in the system. My name wasn't either. I was becoming untraceable, unreal, unseen. Now I move from town to town, staying ahead of the mirrors, changing names, avoiding my own reflection. But no matter where I go, people find me. They knock at my door with shaking hands and stories in their throats. Stories of her. They dream of her. They see her face in candle wax, in puddles, in the window at night. One woman told me her son stopped speaking after whispering Alcina's name in a broken bathroom mirror. A man from Maine said his wife now draws spirals in blood during sleep. Each one of them asks the same thing. How do I stop her? I never have an answer, because I didn't stop her. I opened the door. I called her name. And I remember what she told me that night in the shrine. Let them fear again. So that's what I do. I tell the stories. I feed the fear. Because fear is memory, and memory is life. And she will never be forgotten again.